Greetings, I'm Justin Rothshank, and I'm here to invite you to join me and 30 other potters from around the country for the 10th annual Michiana Pottery Tour, happening on September 25 and 26 in northern Indiana and southern Michigan. You'll find a list of participating potters, links to their web stores, and more information at www.michianapotterytour.com or on our Instagram page at Michiana Pottery Tour. We hope to see you at the 10th annual Michiana Pottery Tour.
Welcome to the Tales of a Red Clay Rambler podcast, featuring interviews with culture makers from around the world. This is Ben Carter. I'm going to be your host. If you'd like more information on the show, please visit our website, talesofaredclayrambler.com. Welcome back to episode 391 of the podcast. Thank you guys for tuning in. Today on the show, I talk with Seth Green about his functional ceramics. You'll recognize Seth's work for the beautiful metallic manganese glazes, as well as the refined forms with clean lines and continuous curves. If you'd like to see examples of his work, you can go to his website. That's sethgreenpottery.com. We also have a double feature on today's show where we're going to have a second interview where Justin Rothshank joins Seth and I to talk about the Indiana Clay Conference. The two have been organizing the conference, which will have its next meeting in Indianapolis, October the 8th and 9th. For more information about that conference, including the online offerings they will have, you can visit indianaclayconference.com. Before we get to that interview, I wanted to thank some of the folks that have donated to our show. We are listener supported, so I'd like to thank Lynn Brown and Bracken Feldman for their contributions. If you'd like to get involved yourself, you can do so at the website. That's talesofaredclayrambler.com/donate. Without further ado, we'll get to the interview. So let's talk about you growing up in Utah and what the artistic influences were and what were the objects and the places you were seeing that got your creativity going when you were younger.
Well, really, southern Utah is really well known for the natural, rock formations. I grew up, about an hour away from Zion National Park and Bryce Canyon. And, really on, I was just inspired by the colors of the landscape and the rock formations. And that's really kind of what inspired me as a youngster. I wasn't really too involved in making art as a youth, but I did have an experience, early on in my life. I blame my addiction to clay on LeVar Burton. I used to watch Reading Rainbow. I'd come home off the bus every day and race to the TV and watch this television program. And one day he was reading a book about making pottery. And I can't remember what the book was, but he did a demonstration on how to make pottery, how to make a pinch pot and a coil pot. And I immediately went out in my garden and dug up some dirt and added water to it. I added too much water, so then I went into my mom's kitchen and got flour and added that to it. Anyway, so I made these little pinch pots and these coil pots, and our family used to burn our garbage in the barrel. And I snuck these little pots into this garbage barrel. And in the morning, I dug through the ashes and I had these pots and they didn't blow up and they survived. And I painted them and I gave them away to all my family members for Christmas. And that was really kind of my early exposure to anything artistic or to ceramics. And then as a high school student, I walked by the ceramics room and saw those wheels, and I remembered that experience as a child, and I immediately kind of gravitated towards taking ceramics. So I took 3 years of high school ceramics, and then it was really in college at Southern Utah University. I didn't know I was going to major in art, but I knew I loved it and I wanted to continue to do it. I had an amazing teacher, Susan Harris at Southern Utah University. Interacting with her and going to conferences like NCECA and applying for shows. Next thing I knew, I was hooked. I was full in, and I studied art, and I did art education as well. So I became a certified high school teacher, which I never ended up teaching high school. I ended up going to graduate school.
Yeah, I actually did the same thing. I went all the way through the education block, and then my undergrad teacher asked me this question: how can you be a good teacher if you're not a good maker? Mm-hmm. And it like threw me off, and she convinced me to go into the studio program out of art ed, and I kept getting focused. But those early classes in education, like studying how people learn, I think is interesting. And that's one of the things that I wanted to talk to you about is, what are the instances in which you feel as a student you learn the best? And then how did that translate? Now you're a professor, so how did that translate into the way you set up the environment for the students to learn?
It's something that, and it's interesting how now, as a university professor, I'm kind of thinking about those early formative years, about how I learned. And I think one of the main things is I was asked to get out of my comfort zone a lot as a student. For an example, I was awful at making handles as a student. And Susan gave me this assignment one semester to make 100 cups and pull 100 different handles on a mug. And that was difficult for me. But I can say that looking back at that, getting out of my comfort zone, doing that hard skill over and over, I became really good at making handles, and it's no longer something I'm afraid of doing. I love it. I embrace it. So that's kind of how I approach the things that I do with my own students. Now I try to get them out of their comfort zone and challenge them to do things that are hard.
So you mentioned that the landscape of Utah was influential in terms of the color. I also think about just a sense of awe, like a lot of Bryce and like some of these other places, you always see people, at least the pictures that are on the postcards, they're having that oh shit experience where they're just like sitting in this landscape going, oh my God, what is this? So can you talk about that sense of awe, and let's tie in architecture, because that's something that you work with now. Can you think about how you want to create or translate either the natural environment or the built environment into the pots? Like, how do you get that sense of awe into an object?
Yeah. So, kind of speaking directly about the influence of Southern Utah, like early on, I was doing a lot of soda firing, using terra sigillatas and flashing slips, trying to kind of reminisce that deep, rich orange, red, brown colors in the work. And then, transitioning into my graduate work as a graduate student, I started at the University of Nebraska, making these soda fired wares kind of inspired by that landscape. And then, I've always been interested in architecture. As an undergrad, I didn't know why I was interested in it, other than it looked like it could be a pot, something that had a lid and a knob and then a form. And that was really the extent of the understanding that I had of why I was so drawn to looking at architecture. Early on in graduate school, I wrote a graduate research travel grant, and I got to go to travel to Chile, to the Curumia Art Center. And it was in association with Anderson Ranch Art Center and Doug Casebeer. And, it was that experience, while I loved making, so we built a kiln. We built in a small little 2-chamber Noborigama wood kiln, kind of based off that climbing kiln at Anderson Ranch. And we built the kiln during the day. We made pots at night by lantern light. It was just kind of the beginning of this art center. It was really an amazing experience. Making pots in a new country, learning about the culture, trying some new foods. It was just an incredible opportunity to get out of Lincoln, Nebraska in the winter and go experience some more weather down in South America. That experience was really life-changing, but the most important, I think, thing that happened to me while I was there in Chile was that we were waiting for the kiln to cool for a couple of days. And I went on a walk out on a peninsula, and there was a really high point, and there was this lighthouse. It wasn't anything really special, just kind of a mundane lighthouse. But from where I was approaching it from downhill, there was a striking silhouette around this lighthouse against the blue sky. And it was like an epiphany. The light bulb really clicked on in my mind. That is why I really love looking at architecture. It's the silhouette and the space around architecture that's really appealing to me. And so, when you talk about that sense of awe and wonder, kind of thinking back to Southern Utah, I mean, you can't help but feel that sense of awe and wonder when you're in the presence of this huge rock formation jutting up into the sky, really wondering, how was that really created? Was that wind or was that rain, erosion? Just amazing feelings that you have. And similar, having these experiences in the presence of these architectural references that I've been kind of looking at. Early on, I was just only able to look at these things in books and online, looking at some of the architectural references of like Prague and Turkey. And, it was originally my experience in Chile that led me to go back to Nebraska and start really studying architecture with a new educated eye. And I began looking up studying architecture, and I stumbled across this old Czechoslovakian book of Czech architecture. I couldn't read a word that was written in it, but I was enamored by all of the spires and finials. Prague is known as the city of spires, and that's really kind of where my current research that's been ongoing for the last 12 years kind of started, was by looking at those architectural references in those books and online. But I didn't have those like personal in-person experiences until later on with those buildings.
Yeah, and the spire is an interesting part of architecture because it's visually, it makes us look up because it's so much higher usually than the building. Like it's the thing that almost touches the sky or touches something, in religious architecture, touching the divine. It's like this transition point. That I think is so similar to being a little kid and seeing like a mountain or a rock formation and looking up, or a building even, and looking up and just thinking like, that's so much bigger than me. It puts the human scale in perspective.
Yeah.
And it's such a beautiful experience. I've had that in churches. I've had that in mosques. I've had that in a lot of places where I've just almost just like looking up, thinking about who I am. I think that's the sign of a good building when it makes me think like, who am I?
Right. Well, the symbolic nature, because, studying spires in Prague is really what kind of led me to look at religious architecture. So I began kind of thinking about the symbolism used in architecture and specifically the spire. And like you said, in religious architecture, depending on the religion, it's pointing towards something higher and greater. and it kind of symbolizes, mankind's journey into something higher and greater. And so, symbolism is really important. And I kind of highlight some of those things in my work using gold luster and the finials and the spires that are kind of inspired by these mosques and these cathedrals and palaces.
Yeah, and I mean, isn't it interesting as you travel around? Like you mentioned that palaces, this is like almost like the pinnacle of aristocracy. It's a sign of wealth. But then you go to the religious equivalent. They're using the same form language, but it's a sign of like godlike power. And then you go into the other ironic place I've had this experience is in Chinese train stations. When I was in Shanghai, there's this amazing train station there. And I just thought, like, this is like the power of man, or like the power of problem solving. And it's just so interesting about how the same form language can represent religion, politics, and wealth, or engineering, but it's all the same form language. I think I guess what I'm getting to is it's a form language that we all relate to. Like, we don't have to explain it. People would just experience it.
There's something really different about experiencing these things in a book and online versus actually going to really be in the presence of an object or something that you're inspired by. And I really think that's super important. I think, in our instantaneous culture of Instagram and Facebook and social media, we are glued to our phones looking at objects and people's posts about their work, and which I think is really good. I think it gives us a lot of information. But I really think it's important. I'm kind of maybe a little bit of an old school mentality, is that, going to the source and looking at the object in real life is super important. In fact, I don't know, about 7 or 8 years ago, I was awarded it was a Kentucky Arts Council individual artist fellowship. And it paid for a trip to travel to Turkey and to Prague. And I had never been to either of these places before. I've just been drooling over the images of these architectural references in books and online for years. And I knew I needed to go there, thinking about, the impact that travel has had on my life, prior to this point. I got to go spend 12 days in Prague, and I got up on every high tower I could and photographed. I had a big telephoto lens, and I photographed all these spires and finials and architectural references of Baroque and Romanesque architecture that I had been, looking at for many years. And I did the same thing in Turkey. I strategically planned my trip, to stay in a hotel in between Hagia Sophia and the Blue Mosque. And so I would sit up on the rooftop of my hotel and like photographing and sketching ideas for pots. And it was really amazing. And I think there was several really important things that happened to me during that trip. But one of the things that began to pop up in my work when I returned was when I was in Turkey. I hadn't really noticed the buttresses on the domes as much as I did when I was in person. But for some reason, there was something really striking about those. So I came home and I began making these architectural handles, kind of based off the buttresses. And then, I started piercing and carving windows and stamping windows into the forms, thinking about cupolas and other windows used in both Prague and in Turkey. So, actually going to the source and being in the presence of these things is I think is really important for any artist, who is really interested in a particular object or a reference. go to a museum, try to look at this object in person. Better yet, try to handle the piece. One of the things I really want to do is go to the Smithsonian, the Freer Sackler, and go handle some of these metalwork objects that I've been really inspired by. So,
man, what a great resource. Yeah. And I interviewed Louise Court, and she talked about like not starting that, but encouraging potters to come to the Smithsonian. And that's still true today. You know, anyone can, I think you write ahead. If anyone's interested, I'll figure out who you should email.
yes, exactly.
And the listeners can join you at the Smithsonian.
I've been there once before, but I didn't plan it ahead of time to be able to handle the collection. And, I was interested in the metalwork collection, but also the ceramic collection there. So that's the next thing on my list, is to set up an appointment and actually go physically handle some of this stuff.
You mentioned that experience in Chile where you see the light coming behind the lighthouse, and it's pushing the silhouette hard, because it's bright right around the edge. How do you figure out how to translate that into ceramic surface? I'm
really more thinking about form when I'm thinking about silhouette, So, clean lines, continuous curves, profile, silhouette around the form is really important. But in relationship to surface, it's kind of interesting, the surface is so in particular, the manganese crystalline glazes that I've been using, they're really kind of busy and kind of active. And those crystal formations are kind of serendipitous. They're never really the same every time I pull pots out of the kiln. And so with my glazed wares, glaze softens and smooths out kind of articulated form transitions and stuff like that. And so I intentionally kind of make my glazed wares different than I make my wood-fired pieces. In the wood kiln, I'm actually trying to put in a lot of banding and detailing and tooling and really emphasizing the form transitions and leaving kind of those areas that if I were to put a glaze on would kind of soften and kind of smooth out those really articulated, detailed edges. And so I'm really conscious about the way that I am treating form and the decorative and articulated edges on my glazed ware versus the pieces that go into the wood kiln during reduction, cool firing.
Yeah, and I think this is a good color theory thing too. Like when you have really dark colors, you're going to see the silhouette, even if there's a lot of crystal action in the kind of the rounding curves of the pot. But then I'm looking back behind you and there's this like amber honey glazed pot behind you. And it even in a zoom picture, it really changes the way you look at the pot. Like you look at the interior of a light color pot, the in between the silhouette, in between the silhouette edges, you see more. But when it's dark, your eye automatically goes to the edge, which is just like, it took me so many years to figure that out. I was a slow learner on color theory.
The glaze development, speaking particularly about the manganese crystalline glazes, really started, so like I said, I began in Prague thinking about, the spires and religious architecture, which led me to the Middle East, to Turkey and to Middle Eastern countries, and kind of looking at objects that were used inside for ritual and ceremony. And some of these objects were these beautifully, exquisite Islamic metalwork pieces that were like brass that are inlaid with precious materials like silver. And so, that kind of that glaze that I called old gold that's kind of like that matte bronze glaze that has those shiny silver crystals that come through the surface during the cooling process. That's kind of what I'm thinking about. I'm kind of thinking about those inlaid metalwork pieces. And then with the wood kiln, the wood firing is kind of relatively recent tool for my research. Probably within the last 5 or 6 years, I've been really kind of honing in on metallic surfaces using iron-rich clay and slips. So I'm using like laterite and red art and some other high iron slips in the reduction cool firings in the wood kiln, and I'm able to achieve these kind of metallic, kind of glittery surfaces that really kind of read metal, which is really ties really well in with my other reduction fired glazed surfaces. So kind of two different veins of work. And when you think, and when you talk about color, my trip to Turkey really turned me on to those turquoise, those kind of like Persian turquoise colors, looking at the tiles on the inside of the mosques. So I've been kind of dabbling around a little bit with some porcelain and some of those like alkaline, transparent turquoise glazes in the soda kiln. And so I'm a little bit all over the place, but I think reduction firing and wood firing in a reduction cooled atmosphere is really kind of what I'm really focusing on, though.
Yeah, look forward to seeing those turquoise. That's like a total departure from the manganese. But I have one more question about the manganese. How do you use that as material safely? Because I know there's some health issues with manganese absorption.
So one of the things that I'm really careful when I'm handling the glaze. I'm wearing gloves, and I often, when I do spray the glaze, although I'm kind of transitioning away from spraying, when I do spray, I definitely wear a respirator, and I'm using a spray booth. I think the most toxic, I guess the most harmful thing to kind of be mindful of is firing. The vapors and the fumes that are emitted during the firing process are not good. So you don't ever want to have a kiln inside your studio that you're working in and firing the pots. I guess some people kind of attribute David Shaner's illness to his use of all the high manganese glazes that he was using. But when I'm firing, I've got an outdoor kiln building, and I usually have a door open, and I usually just go in there and check on the cones and adjust the damper and the gas, and that I don't hang out in the kiln room when I'm firing those. So yeah, you got to be careful with with how you handle the material.
I'm glad you're saying these safety measures, because the glazes are so beautiful. Like, I always feel bad saying don't use that, because I think if you use it carefully, what you can get, like that, the thing I love is the crystals, but also that it's a certain type of satin matte surface with those glazes that it's just really hard to get it exactly like that without having the crystal growth that is happening with the manganese.
Yeah, I'm always lining the pots with not a manganese glaze, with a different, 100% food safe glaze if there, if there is such a thing. But yeah, I try to be careful.
I was looking at your website to prepare for this, and I was looking in your shop, and I see a lot of forms that are almost exactly the same. Like, there's some precision that you've developed through repetition, I would imagine.
Yeah.
But can you talk about that, staying engaged through the process? Because what's interesting is that, like, the pots still look alive. Like, that was the thing that I was liking by looking at that. They're so similar, but the proportions are so exactly right that they don't look like a bunch of just copies of each other. They all seem to have a presence. So how do you do that?
I've developed what I call a vocabulary of touch. And I think any maker that is making, multiples of one form begins to kind of develop a certain vocabulary of touch. So like whatever it is that you're touching is going to have that same quality, some of the same mark making abilities, as well as, I think that for the tools that I use, I think that I think every maker's tools helps them make distinctly different marks and different forms and different gestures and volumes. But I think it's really all about the, it's kind of like learning a language. When you learn a foreign language, at the beginning, you're really kind of translating everything in your mind all the time. And then when you become fluent, you stop translating and it just kind of comes out of your mouth. And I kind of think that, no one's really asked me this question, but in thinking about it, I think it's kind of a lot like that. I think I used to always kind of have my sketchbook in front of me and my sketches and my plans in my mind, what I was going to do. But the more and more I make forms and the more and more I kind of have these references in my mind, I don't necessarily have to think about making those particular decisions anymore. They just kind of to start to come out. So that translates, so like some of my smaller forms versus some of my larger forms, they have kind of similar qualities to them. It's just like the proportions are changing.
That concept of speaking through the language, like you've internalized it so much that you dream in it and you you speak through this language or form. Because that's one of the things that I think about with your work is that I can instantly tell that you've made it by the way it's been touched, regardless of the form. It could be a teapot, it could be a mug. And some of that is touch. And then the other main thing you mentioned is proportion. So you have a very specific, and actually you talked about this before with the wood firing versus glaze surfaces, how you set up the proportions and then how you transition between them with either banding or finials or something like that. So can you talk about complexity, like how you know when to add one more line of banding or one more finial and when you hold yourself back and maybe take that away to emphasize the overall form more?
The two main things is, if I'm going to put a glaze on it, there's going to be less banding. I like the way that the glaze kind of pools over those bands and articulated rings and edges. But I also really, really love the way that they look in the wood kiln with, those articulated edges, remain intact. And so it's been an evolution. So, since I've been, because I've got a train kilt here at the university, at Purdue University, Fort Wayne, where I teach. Ted Neal just lives down the road at Ball State University in Muncie, and he helped me build this kiln, and been really getting some really great results, kind of dialing in these reduction cooled surfaces. So it's been a slow transition, as I become more and more involved in this research of wood firing. The way that I treat the surface of my wood fired pieces with these detailed articulated edges is a lot different than I'm now treating my glazed wares. The glazed wares are becoming more simple and more about smooth profiles versus having a lot of articulated edges and banding. So I guess that's kind of the way that I kind of think about the two different veins of work.
So one of the things I love in terms of a specific form of yours, the teapot, is the spout solution. So you've made a lot of teapots over time, but there's one I'm thinking about is that it's a kind of an S-shaped spout, comes up from the bottom of the base. And there's two things. One is there's a little connector that goes from the pot over to that spout, which is such a great reference to metalwork and all of that. But then also the actual exit hole, you have a large, I don't know what to call it, but it almost looks like a finial, but then you have a really small hole that the tea comes out of. So can you talk about that first, how you came to the S shape in the connection, and then why having that big volume small hole works so well?
So it kind of started, I was looking at these Iranian and Persian really large ewers that had these really kind of like swan-like S-curved spouts, and you can't get that on the wheel. You can throw a long spout on the wheel and kind of put it into an S curve, but it's going to twist like crazy because of the torque in the firing. And so it was actually Pete Pinnell, who was my grad professor, who I would sit in his office and he would be making pots and we'd be troubleshooting about, whatever it is. And this particular day, it was about spouts. So he showed me kind of all the methods that he uses for making spouts. He has like a dowel rod, like a tapered dowel rod that he'll sometimes pull a coil off of. And then he also just kind of makes them solid, cuts them in half, hollows them out, and then score and slip and put it back together. So I tried all of the methods that he had showed me, but I would still never get the result that I wanted. I'd still get these, the movement in the spout. So one of the things I thought, well, why don't I just make one and make a press mold out of it? And then I can really compress that clay into the mold rather than rolling out a coil or pulling like a handle and then twisting into a spout shape. Clay has a memory, that pyroplasticity. And I think one of the reasons that I started to make that particular type of spout is because I wanted to make a spout that didn't move as much in the high fire kilns. And so by compressing that clay into the spout mold, really reduces the amount of like torque and twisting that I'm doing on the clay. And they still do move a little bit in the kiln because they are so delicate up at the top, and really kind of wide down at the base where they meet the body. And so that connection point between the neck and the spout has started to kind of trickle into the work. But I call it a spout tip. And it's really comes from looking at all those really beautiful Islamic ewers that have those really beautiful kind of almost sculptural kind of tips on the spouts. It kind of finishes it off. I like the way that the end of the spout mold was just really small, but then it just needed something to really dress up that spout tip. And I also wanted another place to put some luster on the form, because I was putting it on the knob and also on the little thumb stop on the handles. Just kind of had gave me another place to kind of use the principle of repetition in the work to kind of tie the composition together. And those spouts, those tips I make on the wheel. I throw these tiny little like round globes or other kind of different shaped tips on the wheel.
Yeah, I would love to see one of those pour, because I think that it shoots out, right? Because that's the other thing, is like a lot of volume through a small hole. It creates velocity.
Yeah.
So that just the idea of this elegant spout and then this tea just like launching out of there.
Yeah, I'm really working on kind of really cleaning up that that tip, so it's like a nice clean exit point. So it really does kind of just make this really nice stream. So.
Well, we've both worked with Doug Casebeer at Anderson Ranch, and when I was there, he was like really helping me with some just core fundamentals, and spouts was one of them. And he showed me this spout that came up and actually bent down, but the inside edge did not bend down. Like it was just almost like an illusion. It was like the top rolled out, but on the inside, it came up to a point. And so it would still pour very, sharp and fast and all that. But it just made me think about Doug and the influence he's had on you as a worker. So can you talk about, or as a maker, can you talk about working at the ranch in the different facets that you did and how that influenced you today?
Well, I first and foremost, I think Anderson Ranch was, and it continues to be, in my early kind of formative years as a young artist, was a really special place for me to develop. And I think that mentorship that Doug kind of took the time out of his life to provide for me, I think was really crucial. I think this is kind of another thing that I encourage my students to do is leave Fort Wayne, go somewhere else to take a workshop. Go to somewhere like Anderson Ranch or Aeromont. We have these kind of scholarship programs set up through both of these places, and I send students from the club and my advanced students to take workshops. But I think so. I met Doug Casebeer when I was like a junior in college. I was at Southern Utah University, and I drove up to Logan, Utah, about 5 hours away to Utah State University. And Doug Casebeer was a visiting artist. And he talked all about his international travels to Chile and Jamaica and Nepal. And he talked all about this place called Anderson Ranch, about the resident artist program. And I know, Ben, that you've been a resident artist there, and the summer workshop program. And for whatever reason, just the way he talked about his travels and about Anderson Ranch really resonated with me. And I was a wildland firefighter in college every summer. So, that's kind of where my love for wood firing is kind of tied into my work. But I only had time to go visit Anderson Ranch. I didn't have time to go and take a 2-week workshop. So I called up Doug or emailed him, and I said, "Hey, I don't have time to take a workshop, but can I come visit?" And I did. And he put me up in the dorms there. And it was between the resident season and the summer workshop season. So really nothing was going on. No one was really there. There was just a dirty studio, lots of wood to split, and a kiln to tear down. And he immediately put me to work. And I split some wood, and I tore this kiln down, and I cleaned a bunch of bats and wearboards and cleaned the studio. And I thought, this guy is just using me for slave labor. What am I doing? And but really what he was doing is he was interviewing me for a job. And he kept track of all those hours that I spent. The next year I applied for a scholarship, and I got the full scholarship, but then he provided the rest of the funding for my room and my board. So it was like a full ride. And I had an amazing experience taking a workshop there. And at the end of the workshop, he pulled me aside and he said, what are your plans for your life as an artist? And to be honest, I was actually thinking about becoming a full-time firefighter for the Forest Service. I said, I'm worried that I'm not going to be able to make it as an artist. What he said to me really changed the trajectory of my life. He said, "I think you have what it takes to do this as a career, and I will help you do this." And I don't know if he ever set goals with you, but we'd always kind of talk about a 5-year plan, and we set some goals. And one of them was to go to graduate school, and one of them was to become a university professor. And he kind of mentored me and walked with me through those transition points in my early career. And I did end up going to graduate school, and I am now a university professor. And so his mentorship and his belief in me as a young artist, and then his willingness to back up his words moving forward in my life has made all the difference. And all he asks me to do is to pay it forward. So that's my goal as a maker and as a teacher and as an artist, to try to pay it forward to people that I have contact with in my life. I'm still connected with him today. He's coming in November to help me build a wood fire soda kiln here at the university. I'm looking forward to spending some more time with him. And I listened to your interview with him a couple of weeks ago, and just the generous things that he's done for our field. I think if everyone was as fortunate as I have been to have a mentor and a friend like him, that would be amazing.
Well, you hit the nail on the head when you said, like, he doesn't say something if he's not going to do it, which right. I really appreciate that. And some of the stuff that we worked on when I was there was writing, like learning how to write. And he just kept telling me that, like, just say what you're saying once, and that's it. You don't have to keep saying it again and again and again. And that in the pots also, it was writing, it was pots, it was everything. And I think about that is exactly his personality. Like there's not a lot of fat to trim from his work, his words, his all of it, which I really admire that. I think I've tried to, well, I talk way more than he does, but I feel like I've tried to emulate that a little bit.
Well, I learned a lot more by just watching him work and watching him interact with people. One of the things he taught me was, because Takashi Nakazato used to come to the ranch every summer that I was there, and I would help him load his wood kilns, and I'd watch him work in the studio. And, one of the things that Doug pointed out to me is like, you should watch him throw. And so I would go in there and watch him throw and watch what he does with the slip in his hands. And so he uses slip mostly when he's throwing. He doesn't really use a lot of water. And, that's one thing that kind of I learned from him. He really taught me how to observe and to have my peripheral vision kind of open all the time. So.
Well, you mentioned this concept of paying it forward, and I wanted to bring up one of your students, Brady Fanning, who was I got to meet earlier this year. And man, talk about like a phenom. I think you have paid it forward, and it like, I don't know exactly what to say about him, just that I'm so impressed, and through conversations I had with him, you've really helped to give him a foundation of skills that now he can do anything. And he's super young, but he has this like amazing touch. So can you talk about, in the case of him, how you've sort of helped set opportunities up for him and also train him?
Well, like I said, he's, I've been, because he got to go to Aramont to take your workshop, and I've encouraged him to do things like that. Trying to remember what it was like to be in their shoes. I can't even imagine. I think our field has exploded in the last 15, years since I was, it's been longer than that since I've been a student of their age. But I just think about the competition that these students have, not only for getting their work out into the world, but also if they want to go teach high school, or they want to go teach at a university, or go work at an art center, go be a resident artist. I think that the competition is really stiff. And one of the things that I like to instill in my students, and I'm a big believer in this, is that you have to be willing to work harder than all of your peers. You have to be willing to put in the time. You have to be willing to go to places like Aramont to take workshops, to create opportunities for yourself. If you stay in your studio here at the university and you don't go to visiting artist workshops, and you don't go to take 2 and 3 week workshops, you're limiting the number of opportunities that you're going to create for yourself. I think half of what we do as artists is we have to show up. We have to apply. We have to apply for the scholarships. We have to enter the exhibitions. We have to go to the workshops. And I have found that these are the opportunities, like going to Anderson Ranch and, visiting Doug and doing all that work, thinking it was kind of worthless, but it translated into something huge. I thought that little experience at the time was like, man, that was a waste of time. But looking back at it now, all of these years, and that relationship that I've had with Doug, is that little experience, that decision to go to Utah State with no gas money, to go to that visiting artist lecture, was pivotal for my life. And so I think, I guess that's one of the things that I'm trying to pay forward, is to get my students out of their comfort zone, get them into, places outside of the university to create opportunities for themselves, because that's how it works. That's how we network and how we kind of build relationships in our community.
To wrap up, can you leave a way for people to contact you, maybe your website or social media, if they wanted to talk about anything that came up today?
Yeah. So my website is sethgreenpottery.com. And you can find me on Instagram at Green Pottery. So if you have any questions, let me know.
Nice. And you're going to have pots at the Michiana Pottery Tour, which is coming up at the end of the month. Is it the 24th?
25th and 26th, Saturday and Sunday. Yeah, this will be the third year that I'm participating in the Michiana Pottery Tour. It's a hybrid tour this year, and I've selected to have my work solely online. So it'll be available through my website. So stay tuned for some shop updates.
Well, thanks, man. It was good to see you.
Thanks, Ben. It's been a pleasure.
So we're here to talk about the state of clay in Indiana, which is coincidentally a name of an exhibition that's happening right now. But I wanted to have you guys just talk about how you feel about the clay community. Like, what are the core parts of Indiana clay, and actually the bigger region, southern Michigan and other states as well. And either of you guys can jump in on this.
I grew up in Indiana, so I guess I'll start it off. We have a great clay community here in the northern part of the state. Indiana is a long state, so there's a lot of stuff that I think happens down south around the Indiana-Kentucky border that maybe I'm not totally aware of. And then there's another hub sort of in central Indiana around Indianapolis and Bloomington, and then just north of Indy too, which is still about 3.5 hours away from here. So I think there's some lively stuff happening with clay all across the state, but I'm probably more familiar with the northern section. And this year marks our 10th anniversary of the Michiana Pottery Tour, which was organized to help connect studio potters and clay artists here in northern Indiana and also southern Michigan, which I live about 20 minutes south of the Michigan border. So Michigan is very close, and also has a great community of clay artists.
Yeah, I'll jump in there. I think, I'm relatively new to the state. My family and I, we've been here for going on 5 years. And, previously I came from Eastern Kentucky. And I was really familiar with the clay community in Kentucky, and we were really well connected around the state. And one of the main reasons was Joe Molinaro. I don't know if you guys know who that is, but he was a professor at Eastern Kentucky University, and he would constantly bring the state together for exhibitions, for conferences, for visiting artist lectures. He was a really good community builder. And when I came to Indiana, I felt a little bit alone. And I went to the Michiana Pottery Tour, and this is where I met Justin. And we just began talking about kind of the connectedness that clay people have in the state. And, it's really great to have Justin kind of in my backyard, basically in Goshen, just about 40 minutes away, to help me become connected to the clay community in Indiana. And so I'm excited about what's going on in the state. And that's one of the reasons why we kind of started talking about forming the Indiana Clay Conference.
That's what you call a smooth transition, Seth. That was beautiful.
Well played.
So let's talk about the conference in the need for it, like why the conference is needed within a big state like Indiana.
Well, I mean, geographically, because of how, I guess, long or tall the state is, and there being sort of these pockets of urban areas that are sort of divided or surrounded by rural areas, it's not always easy to connect. The university scene in Indiana is really, those three locations: north, central, and south. And so there hasn't been a lot of opportunity to connect physically with other artists in that way. There's a great lively community of both practicing potters and also educators working at universities, but no events really that draw people in to the state.
one of our early conversations, sitting around Justin's beautiful pots at his studio at the first Michiana Pottery Tour that I attended back in 2016, we kind of started talking about, that there are a lot of really great things happening in the state, but we just don't know about it. And we're not really helping each other promote what we're doing. I think that Michiana Pottery Tour is a really great example of one thing that's really great that's been happening in the northern Indiana, kind of Michiana area. But what's happening around the state, maybe we're not all really connected together. And I think the conversation, and Justin, you can correct me if I'm wrong, is, when we were talking about, okay, well, let's, what can we do to help build community and build the network of potters in the state and ceramic artists in the state. And, I think we just started talking about maybe we should have like a conference or something. But it takes money to start a conference. And so we both agreed to kind of keep our eyes peeled for the opportunities to start a conference. And I was able to tap into some research funding here on my campus. And I called Justin up and I said, hey, let's do it. Let's get it started. I've got a little bit of money to get us started. And it was part of my Leadership Academy project on my campus. And they gave me a little bit of funding to do a project. And the project was, I'm like, well, we're already going to do this. Why don't I just make my Leadership Academy project the conference? So that's kind of how we began kind of putting the conference together, was at that point.
There are demonstrators for the conference. There's going to be a panel discussion. There is an exhibition. So let's talk about when you can make a conference from scratch to be exactly the conference you want it to be. How do you decide which are the areas you want to emphasize?
Yeah, boy, that's a great question. If you're going to do it, you should really find someone like Seth Green to lead the charge. But I also think, it's an evolutionary process. I don't think our first conference 2 years ago was perfect by any means. And we're learning along the way. And even that first conference, we were open to some ideas and suggestions and education about what's happening in the state. Like I said, both Seth and I are here at the top of Indiana, and we don't always know what's going on down south. But we also, we're aware that, Brian Harper's at the bottom of the state. He's been heavily involved in starting Art Axis, and Amico Clay is in the central part of the state, which has been a leader in ceramics for decades. And there's many others I'm not mentioning. And one of the fascinating components of our first conference was inviting Malcolm Smith to give the keynote address, where he spent almost the whole address talking about the history of clay in Indiana, which, I grew up here, and there was all kinds of stuff that I had no idea about. And so I think, if you're starting something like this, being open to learning and hearing from the constituents who are participating is certainly key to finding some level of success. And like I said, we haven't even started our second conference yet. So I think we have plenty more to learn.
Kind of what we decided to start kind of modeling the conference out after was, I don't know if you guys are familiar with a Michigan Mud Conference that happens. I was a presenter there, I don't know, back in 2010. And it was a kind of a small, intimate kind of regional conference. So our first conference was, we had Martha Grover, Sarah Pike, Malcolm, and who am I forgetting? It's been 2 years. Matt Metz. Yeah, Matt Metz has a connection to the state. He's from Kendallville, Indiana. I think Kendallville. Yeah. And so, one of the things as we've kind of transitioned into this second biennial conference is we'd like to have some of the presenters that have a connection to the state in some way. So, Wes Brown is one of our presenters this year. He's a recent graduate of IU Bloomington. And then I think Jane Schellenbarger is another presenter. And not all the presenters have to have a connection, but we'd like to have one or two. And then Jen Allen and Shoji Satake were also IU grads. So there's some ties to the state, and that's kind of one of the things that we kind of want to do kind of moving forward.
We spent a lot of time looking at not only Michigan Mud, but the Worcester Conference over in Ohio that's been going on for decades. Is a great model that's out there, and there's similar state-led conferences around the country that we spent some time. But yeah, really Michigan Mud and Worcester were ones that we had both been a part of, either as presenters or attendees, and they seemed like great models to jump off of.
And the goal kind of moving forward is to kind of move the conference throughout the state. So it'll be in Indianapolis this year, kind of in the central part of the state. In 2023, it'll be at IU Bloomington. Malcolm Smith and Chase Gamblin will host the conference down there. And then it'll be at 2025, it'll be at Ball State University, and Ted Neal will host. And then Al Holland at Southern Indiana. So that's kind of what we want to kind of have it travel around the state, so it's not in one place every time. And like Justin said, we're really open to this kind of being an evolution. We took some feedback from participants last conference, and we've changed, maybe added some additional programming. Like, for example, we've had an open call for juried presentations or demos. So we've had several of those come in, and we're going to kind of filter those into the program along with the demonstrators. And then one of the things that Justin is going to be spearheading at the conference is a panel discussion on best business practices as a studio artist. So those are kind of two things that really kind of popped up in those surveys that we put out. And, we're really trying to accommodate, what the state wants and what participants want. And we're also doing a cup sale, which is a fundraiser for future conferences this year. I don't know, Justin, you want to talk a little bit more about the panel discussion? I'm really excited about that.
When we got our heads together for this idea, there was a clear interest. There's great educational programs here in the state, but there's also really great practicing potters, and we wanted to build a conference that appealed to both. So diversity of presenters related to technique. So functional potters, those working in sculpture or more decorative work are represented. But then we also wanted to provide content that appealed to people working in their studios. And so this panel that we've pulled together includes 3 artists who are business owners here in Indiana, and we're going to talk about some of the business practices that they've started. One of them is really heavy in production. There's another who operates sort of a community-led studio, and so we want to give some ideas about how you can make a living working in clay outside of the academic setting, and that is an exciting topic for me, especially.
Well, the X factor here has been COVID. It takes a lot of years to plan these conferences, and then COVID hits, and then it's like, oh, how is this going to work? So how have you guys decided to handle safety for the participants, but also logistics? Like, where are people going to stay? Because hotels have changed their regulations. Like, everything's kind of in flux. So how are you guys dealing with that?
I think, I guess, back up and just say one thing about technology. I think our first couple of meetings, Justin and I met in the middle of Fort Wayne and Goshen, and met at like a little diner and had a meeting, during lunch. And I mean, that took all of, half of our day out of our life to go and just kind of talk. But, I think we've been able to connect via Zoom to kind of plan and, put this program together. But I think as far as kind of adjusting to COVID, I think it's been kind of more of a recent development in the last couple of weeks. I think I don't think, I know we're going to offer a virtual offering. So it's going to be a hybrid conference. Just kind of nailed this down yesterday. I was at the Indianapolis Art Center hanging the exhibition. But we're going to offer a virtual option for people who either can't travel or are a little nervous to do that with COVID, which I think would allow us to maybe get a little bit of a broader reach. So, watch for that update on the website this early next week. We'll be putting some options to attend virtually, as well as some one-day passes, because I know that sometimes maybe people can't come to both days of the conference. And so we're going to be offering either a pass on Friday the 8th of October or Saturday the 9th of October. We're following kind of the state protocols with masks, and, the Indianapolis Art Center has, recently come out and revised their guidelines with mask wearing. So now everyone is required to wear a mask indoors. And so we'll follow suit. So we'll have, we'll be wearing masks, and of course our presenters will be able to take their masks off as they present. But navigating COVID has been a challenge, but thankful we have Zoom to kind of help us out with that.
Yeah, I think when it comes to the state-by-state regulations, it's hard sometimes to know. In a way, it's great that the Indianapolis Art Center has just said, we're doing masks, because then you guys don't have to decide. You just say, we're following what they're doing. Because I've been involved with some stuff here in New Jersey where the CDC was saying one thing, the state had a stricter regulation than the CDC, but then now it's the way our government... This is a much bigger topic that we don't have to go into, but there's so many levels of our government that are disagreeing on how to do things. So it's nice to just do the safest thing, and then hopefully people just show up and do it. That's the best outcome.
I would say from a COVID standpoint, I mean, it's everyone's life has been a roller coaster over the last year anyways, and this conference planning is no different. When we started planning, I think it was sort of like, well, are we going to do this? Where are we going to be at? And then as we progressed, we thought, oh, yeah, this is going to be great. And then just in the last, 6-8 weeks, we started to realize, oh, are we going to, lose registrations, or, we have to adjust now again. So the roller coaster has really been there. And I'm really glad that we have the virtual option now, working with the Indianapolis Art Center too, because I think that opens up some other possibilities. But we will be able to be in person, and I think it'll be a safe setup for folks that make the trip.
I wanted to talk a little bit more about the exhibition that's a part of this. This is curated by Kira Kalandi, and it's the State of Clay. So it's literally like what is happening in Indiana. So can you guys talk about wanting to have an exhibition and what you think that does for the participants?
We wanted to first and foremost kind of provide a platform for the presenters and the people helping to organize the conference, to have an opportunity to show their work in context with the conference, but also give the opportunity to everyone in this. One of the requirements for the exhibition is that they either have to have lived or worked at any time in their life in the state of Indiana. So people who are no longer living in the state, but are, former Hoosiers or went to school here, they can apply for the exhibition. So that's something they can kind of look forward to in the future. All of those people out there listening, thinking, oh, dang, I should have applied for the show. And giving them an opportunity to also put their foot forward and have an opportunity to have their work exhibited in context with the conference has been really good too. So that's the State of Clay in Indiana show, and we're our practice, kind of what we've been doing now and as we move into the future, is we want to also involve other groups or organizations in the area that the conference is being held to allow them to have an exhibition. So Barry Barnes at University of Indianapolis is putting a a past and present show together. D. Shad was the professor who he took his place when he started teaching there. So he's going to have work as well as some of his students. And I know that there's some happenings going on at the Fountain Square Clay Center. I know that the Indie Clay Co-op is going to have some type of event. And I think there's two professors at Herring School of Art. They're going to have a show up at the Fountain Square Clay Center during the conference as well.
Part of it too is that it's an important way to visually see the broad spectrum of work that's coming out of the region. I mean, we're a Midwestern state, but you can see work that's representative of people from all over the country who have had connections here. Functional pots, decorative, sculptural, installation work, that kind of thing. So it's great. And it also gives an opportunity for the juror. We're picking a different juror from around the state for each year to do that. So it also gives a flavor of where that juror's perspective falls on the spectrum of the state of Clay in Indiana. And, for me as a Hoosier, it's great. I mean, 2 years ago, going to that show, I saw work by people I had no idea were connected to Indiana or even lived in Indiana. And so it's a great way to make those connections and build the network of folks working here.
When I lived in California, there was a similar California Clay conference that was happening in Davis every year. And one of the things I found is that the undergraduate students looked forward to that way more than in Sika. And it was the local conference. Well, California is a massive state, so I think it was a big conference. But it was that local conference that seemed accessible. Like getting into an exhibition there did not seem like it was out of their reach. And because of that, people put a lot of energy, and every university showed up, and each university has a show for, within that space of the conference. And it became such a rallying point for California Clay. And you guys are doing the same thing. It's like that model of almost like the conference is the hub, but then it's spread out with all these exhibitions around. And I think that's a really valuable thing for young artists and, I'm sure for older artists as well.
That's a really good way to describe it, Ben. That's kind of exactly what we're trying to do with these exhibitions in association with the conference.
Well, to wrap up, can you guys plug when it is, how people can register, and do you guys have suggestions where people stay? All of those types of logistics.
Yeah, the website is indianaclayconference.com. Registration will be on there, and Seth has spent some time organizing partner hotels, so I think that's all linked on the website for lodging. What am I forgetting, Seth?
The Holiday Inn and Expression Suites has a conference rate, and a link directly to that to get the access to that discount is on the website under lodging. We have, like I mentioned in the beginning, we have in-person option for students and standard registration for people to come in person. But we also are going to be in the next couple of days, maybe early next week, adding the virtual options as well as like the one-day pass options as well. So there'll be kind of multiple ways that people can kind of join the conference.
Yeah, the other thing was the date. When is the date?
October 8th and 9th. And all the information about the conference, about the presenters. There's also a call for cup donations. Even if you can't attend the conference, feel free to ship a piece to the Indianapolis Art Center to kind of help raise money for scholarships and future programming. Yeah, we're really looking forward to this second conference.
Well, thanks, guys. I appreciate you taking the time. Hope the conference goes well.
Thanks a lot.
Thanks, Ben.
I'd like to thank Seth and Justin for coming on the show today. They have lots going on, so I hope you will support them in their work as well as the Indiana Clay Conference. I'd also like to thank today's sponsor, the Michiana Pottery Tour. They're going to be hosting their 10th annual tour September the 25th and 26th in northern Indiana and southern Michigan. The tour will be hybrid this year, so you can find a list of potters who will be in person, as well as the links to web stores of the folks that will be participating online. You can find out all that information at michianapotterytour.com, or you can follow them on Instagram under the same name. I'll be back next week with another episode. Thank you guys for tuning in. If you'd like more information on the artists on the show, or if you'd like more information about the workshops and events that I'll be having in the next couple months, you can follow me on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook under Carter Pottery. Another great way to support the show is to leave me a comment on iTunes. To do that, search Tales of a Red Clay Rambler under iTunes Podcasts, and you'll find a page that's linked to our show. Thank you guys for the support.
This podcast is a production of the Brickyard Network, an extension of the Archie Bray Foundation for the Ceramic Arts. To find out more about our lineup of ceramic podcasts, visit brickyardnetwork.org.